The moments of chaos, the moments of disruption, the moments of cataclysmic change are the moments, if you lean into those moments, that's where you show really what you're made of when it comes to leadership. That's when you have the opportunity to demonstrate that I'm not just a fair weather leader. I am a person who can regain my own footing in times of stress and who can create calm and even create forward momentum through very difficult times.
Welcome to the Leadership Transformations Podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Willmore, accountability coach with Paradox Circle Consulting. In this podcast, we explore real-life situations with the help of our two founders and principal consultants, Janet Taggart and Linda Linfield. Today, we are joined by Linda Linfield. Linda specializes in executive leadership and leadership team development, sparking higher levels of self-awareness and purpose-driven mastery. Welcome back to the podcast, Linda.
Thanks so much for having me today, Stephanie.
And today we're going to unpack a topic that we hear about often in our coaching sessions, and it's this idea of maintaining strategic effectiveness, even in environments that are constantly changing. So how would you answer that question, Linda? How do leaders maintain strategic effectiveness even in an environment that's unpredictable?
It's really, really a timely question. Right now, when so many organizations are working really hard to adapt to current marketplace realities, there's movement toward return to office, toward building highly effective teams, and really dealing with AI and what that's going to mean to our businesses. So we have a lot of pressure on leadership, not to mention the regulatory environment that's shifting right now for all businesses, not just for financial businesses or businesses that are used to dealing with compliance issues. The regulatory environment, governmental realities are causing all businesses to kind of regroup and figure out what the priorities are in this new environment. And whenever this happens, what we see is a level of frustration start to develop inside of organizations, particularly in organizations that are fast driving, highly competitive, fast growing companies. So what I'm seeing right now is you have leadership that's trying to maintain its presence on the cutting edge of their market, and yet still trying to create a sense of stability inside their organizations and elevate or lift their engagement. And what's happening is there's a disconnect. So while leaders are trying to meet market demands, and while people deeper in the organization are trying to demonstrate their consistent value, they've all developed skills of strategic focus and navigation and holding the course while things are changing. And yet the pace of the change has increased so dramatically that we're starting to see cracks. And even leaders, very seasoned leaders, are starting to feel the effects of priority whiplash. And sometimes these priority whiplashes are impacting even people at the highest levels of the organization. And so while they're feeling personally at risk or on their toes trying to figure out strategy organizationally, they're also having to figure out how to keep their teams engaged and trying to figure out what they can tell people and what they can't tell people as the proverbial sands keep shifting, right? So this is demoralizing to people because people who are used to accomplishing things in really difficult situations, they're used to holding the course and accomplishing things. What they're finding is they're not able to achieve the sense of accomplishment. Things are moving so quickly that their need to complete or their need to say, yes, I've kept my promise and I've done what I've said I would do, or my team has done what it has promised to do, that ability is compromised. And it's causing a lot of stress in environments at every level.
So, Linda, what it seems like what you're talking about is, you gave us this, higher level market context, but then it really kind of boils down to the individual leader and how this whiplash can really cause some mindset issues, some psychological challenges. And so, how do leaders navigate that demoralization?
Right, so exactly. So the reality is that all of us, each of us, regardless of our level in the organization, are humans. We know that, but sometimes we forget the impact that every human being, regardless of their professional level or their skill level, each one of us has needs for safety and security. And those needs need to be reasonably addressed by ourselves or by others to help us feel reasonably certain that we can provide for our needs and for the needs of the people we care about. Right now, because of all the shifts and changes, the market realities, the changes inside of organizations, people at every level are feeling like their safety and security is at risk. And so even though they're trying to handle those challenges on their own, when those are exacerbated by the feelings that even when, the typical thing I might try to do, which is focus on the work or pull out my to-do list and check things off and make sure that everything for which I have responsibility is moving forward as it should, we're not able to do that because of the shifting priorities. We're getting something that we think of as priority whiplash. So we have priority whiplash on top of our fears about our basic needs not being met. And that's happening at every level of the organization. And as leaders, we are right in the midst of that. We are reacting to workplace chaos, and we are reacting to our own sense of lack of stability, worries that maybe our jobs are going to be impacted by the changes that are afoot in our environment. And yet we have the responsibility for keeping others on our teams engaged and productive, even as the sands are shifting. Right. So one of the things that happens in environments like this, when executives or leaders in organizations start to feel their own safety at risk and feel themselves being somewhat tentative or uncertain about what's coming next, is they start to lose patience and become reactive with their staff members. And then you start to hear words like, oh, the people who work in this organization should just be thankful they have jobs. And while there's an element of that's true, that when you're addressing safety and security, people are or should be grateful to have jobs, that phrase is not calling to the part of people that will respond to their higher level needs, because you want them to be safe and secure, or feel like they're responsible for maintaining their safety and security. And you want to call to their higher level psychological needs, which are the opportunities to belong and the opportunities to make a difference and to, at the highest level, to self-actualize or to become all that they can be. They're so trapped in this other conversation that, and as leaders, we could be adding to that conversation about what you should be focusing on as your basic needs, instead of addressing those needs and what's possible for them to do in addressing those needs for safety and security, while calling to the higher level needs that allow people to stay engaged and to refocus and to reframe what it is they're committed to beyond safety and security. And as leaders, that's our job. It's our job to do it for ourselves. And it's our job or our opportunity to do that for those around us, those who report to us, and our peers. We want to demonstrate real leadership and become the person or become the leader who can guide, who can maintain our footing, and then guide others through the storms that beset us all in our careers. And so that's what we want to address right now. We want to address how we stabilize our need for safety and security and how we call to the higher levels of motivation.
Yeah. And so it sounds like in order to reach that effectiveness, you talk about helping leaders become grounded again and to ground themselves in something deeper than we'll just be grateful for having a job. You spoke to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is something that Janet and I talked about in our job satisfaction and engagement podcast. And, when we do coaching, we really do help our leaders rediscover or to discover really what their meaning and purpose is, right? And so that's kind of what brings us to that higher level of performance. Is that kind of what you're
That's
getting at?
exactly right, Stephanie. That is exactly right. Because at more advanced stages of our growth, or once we get beyond once we can reestablish our sense of safety, that we have some control, that we can figure that part out, and that we can be resourceful and resilient even in the most basic needs. And we have tools for that. Questions we ask people to help them get back on their feet when it comes to their safety and security, so that we can invite them to start considering again their higher levels of commitment. For example, more advanced stages of growth. You mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's not the only person who's addressed this sort of progression of needs, but it's very interesting to consider how powerful it is when we start to tap into a sense of belonging on the team. And I hear this a lot. When leaders start to find their footing again, they start talking about things like, I'm concerned about my team. My team does really well together, and I want to make sure the team feels like they're intact and they have a measure of safety, that they can support each other through difficult times. It's what our team is known for. And then beyond that sense of belonging, what is it we're truly committed to? Because if we can stay focused on our mission and the long term, like the mission and values that we're personally committed and that our team that we belong to is committed to, then what happens is we can also start to re-energize ourselves around what kind of difference can we make in this current environment? How do we solve the problem of being strategic and maintaining our focus and achieving the results we can achieve, even while the sands are shifting, or when it feels like the rug has been pulled out from under our feet? For some of us, we can tap into the joy that comes from solving puzzles. And this particular environment is a particular kind of puzzle that needs to be solved. So if we reframe it that way, we can call to our better selves to be able to benefit from the joy that comes from puzzle solving. Others are really committed to building expertise or creating relationships that extend beyond the current task. These motivations, if we can tap into those, will transcend the chaos of the current environment and allow us to elevate not only our performance, but the performance of those around us. And it's just so interesting and somewhat ironic, Stephanie, that at the very moment when we're stepping into leadership, when we are, or more advanced leadership, when we're gaining responsibility, when our ideas are being listened to, when we're starting to come into our own in terms of influencing others appropriately and causing the right things to happen. At those very moments when we've leaned into our potential as leaders and have started to cause these things to happen that we're so committed to, and we're getting kind of excited about, suddenly we experience these huge disruptions. There's a merger, there's an acquisition, there's a change in organizational strategy, there's a new type of regulation that takes everyone's attention, there's a downturn in the market that requires us all to rework our budgets and operating plans. And so, just at the moment we feel like we're gaining some traction, we have this disruptions.
Yeah. And what have you noticed happens to people? What have you noticed happens to leaders in that situation, and what's the impact on their teams?
Well, we talked about this just a minute ago, right? Like this is the practicality for leaders. This is where we go into fight, flight, or freeze, because we're all in on the strategic focus, and then the rug gets jerked from under us, and suddenly we start to wonder about our relevance, or whether we're actually going to be able to do our jobs, or we start to doubt, and we freeze. Or we start to think, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe this isn't what I want to do, or maybe I chose the wrong company to work for. And then we start to go into a downward spiral. What I'm really here to say today, and what I say to all of my clients, is those moments are actually the moments you're made for. The moments of chaos, the moments of disruption, the moments of cataclysmic change are the moments, if you lean into those moments, that's where you show really what you're made of when it comes to leadership. That's when you have the opportunity to demonstrate that I'm not just a fair weather leader. I am a person who can regain my own footing in times of stress, and who can create calm and even create forward momentum through very difficult times. What happens when you do that? What happens when a leader will find his or her footing again and have a sense of composure, the sense leadership presence, a sense of gravitas? It's very attractive to people who are going through change and who are not settled. They will tend to gravitate toward the calmness, or they will run, right? They'll go into fight, flight, or freeze and leave. But those who are interested in staying or committed to the mission and the values of your organization will gravitate toward you and your calm composure, because they're looking for a way to get settled again as well. And they're looking for a way to become productive, to be able to add something of value, to belong to something larger than they are. And as a leader who finds your footing quickly and establishes that sense of calm, and then starts to lean into developing forward momentum, that becomes extremely attractive, and your leadership credence, your leadership credibility goes up a notch, and then another notch, right? Because you're able to master your own sense of well-being, and then get others to participate with you in moving things forward in a positive direction. My point is really that when organizations go through change, the kind of change that we've been talking about, workers start to look for ways out of what they're experiencing as a frenetic and undependable or chaotic environment. And even those who may have been with the organization for a very long time, and leaders, many of whom, and most of whom I would say, are incredibly committed, they start burning out because they're trying to hold everything together. And for everyone, change weariness sets in. Unless the leader an emerging leader can establish a sense of calm and resilience amid the storm. I really wanted to underscore the importance of reframing as one of the core jobs of leadership. Because a leader's job, as a leader creates this calm in the midst of the storm, the leader becomes, in essence, a shock absorber during the change. It's not that the leader doesn't experience the shock, him or herself. The leader experiences the shock and becomes the shock absorber. By extension, coaches and teaches other people in the environment to also how to become shock absorbers, how to maintain composure when everything around them is changing. So becoming a shock absorber. Another way of saying that is to become a sense maker, to help people understand what possible causes for the change might there be. Even if we don't have all the information, if no one has bestowed that information on us, that we look at the environmental signals and we make sense of what is currently happening in our organization relative to those environmental signals or environmental changes. So we become the shock absorber, the sense maker, the stabilizer. Another way of thinking about it is the bridge between different points of view. And in the process, also becoming the encourager. So we model the behavior of reestablishing our footing, of being able to bridge and make sense and absorb shock. And we encourage those around us to do the same. Not because we're oblivious to the problems or not impacted by the changes, but because we have enough composure, enough leadership presence, enough self-awareness, and the ability to manage ourselves that we can become a safe place during the storm. We can become an encouraging voice. We can help people, help ourselves and other people around us restore our equilibrium and be at choice about what we're going to do next to cause the optimal outcomes.
Yeah, I love that terminology that you used. You almost created these roles that people can take on or aspire to: the sense maker, the shock absorber, the stabilizer. So say that somebody aspires to be a shock absorber. What does that look like in the day to day? What are the kinds of things that they do? Can you give an example?
Yeah, such a great question, Stephanie. I love the questions you're asking. So, while a human tendency in times of stress is there's a real temptation to commiserate with people, especially people who are suffering and who you care about. The temptation is to commiserate. And sometimes that looks like complaining or leaking, or it looks like you joining in and adding to the negative conversation. And while it's okay as human beings to be frustrated, because, we are humans and we do get frustrated, we as leaders and we as aspiring leaders cannot afford to lead from a place of despair or lead from a place of misery. We have the responsibility and the opportunity to both have compassion and to lead with empathy and understanding and still convey a sense of optimism, or a sense that, by optimism, what I mean is not blind cheerleading, like not pep talks. I'm talking about the kind of optimism that comes from knowing that we are equal to the task at hand, that our skills, our abilities, our care for each other will enable us to get through in the most positive way possible. You might say to others, to this end, right? You might say to others something like, I know this is a disappointment. I also can feel the disappointment. We've been so excited to finish this goal, and you in particularly have been really excited to check the last parts of what you've been working on off your list. So let's think about, in this situation, how close we can get, or what it will take for us to do the right thing for you, the right thing for our team, the right thing for our organization. That way, you're not demeaning or diminishing what people are experiencing, but you're also not giving them a pass to stop the work because they're so miserable. What you're doing is you're helping them find their footing and giving them some place to think from that will allow some good to come out of the frustration. Let's think about the right thing we can do in this situation to cause the best outcome you and I and our team can cause together. Something else you can say that allows you to maintain your composure and your leadership well-being is you can express that if the change was a surprise to you, you can say, there are also some surprises that I experienced as part of this change. Now I'm really focused on making sense of what's going on right now, what's expected of us, and how we can add the most value. because I want to be the most help possible as we navigate these new expectations. This is where your leadership presence becomes most valuable to your team members. It's also the hardest place for you to access when you are personally suffering. It's possible, however. It's something you can do if you put your minds to it. It's really important, and it really elevates the level at which you can operate.
Right. I mean, it sounds like that reframing in action. So not only do you reframe for yourself, but you help others within your influence to reframe as well. And it's always important to aspire to that, to be able to always reframe. But what if leaders are still struggling? What if that undercurrent is still getting in their way, even though they're trying their best? What could they do in that situation?
Well, I'll tell you, when I am working with someone, and this is more common than not. With my clients, it's more common than not. They are often thrown hardballs when it comes to leading through difficult change. And so what I tell my clients is, you just need to call me. And I know Janet does this as well. You just need to call us, text, call, send an email. And if we can respond immediately, we will. And if not, we will let you know when we can. The leaders we work with have told us that keeping their presence of mind to be available and encouraging while they are personally struggling is one of the hardest parts of their job. So honestly, they just needed to pick up the phone and call us. We're their support staff, right? Because this is exactly where we and they can work magic together. Our job at Peridot Circle Consulting, and our job, we become trusted friends and colleagues of the people we work with. We're doing our job when we help the leaders we work with embrace their challenges as not only as part of their roles, but as part of their opportunity to lead at the next level. These opportunities that feel the most challenging to us today are actually what allows us to play at higher and higher levels of the organization where there's more at stake. Our mission at Peridot Circle Consulting is to help leaders lead, to help the best leaders become even better. And sometimes, in fact, quite often, it means helping leaders hold space for themselves as they process the cataclysmic, or when cataclysm, the tectonic plates shift and there's an earthquake, the big disasters, and also some of the undercurrent challenges that they're facing. So they need to hold space for themselves to process while they're holding space for others to do their processing. So they have to hold both at the same time without letting one set of issues and challenges leak into the other.
That's great. And I'm so glad that you kind of elaborated on how you and Janet and those on our team can help people navigate both of those different needs. So I'm wondering, you talked about, reframing and about, becoming a shock absorber. And we also like to give our clients a little bit of a framework, especially when it comes to influencing their teams. So let's talk a little bit about the how. How do leaders maintain effectiveness in this kind of environment from a team's point of view? What are some tools we can give them to take away from this episode?
One way to think about change when you're living in a rapidly changing environment and the change feels constant. If the change feels constant, then we can start seeing it as predictable. And once we see things as predictable, then we can start planning for it as it's predictable. So we may not know what the change is going to be, but if we know that that there's always change coming, then it allows us to do a few things. And I've outlined 4 of those things we can do. One is that we can, in the midst of change, we can also always focus on what's in our control and influence. So we can identify what we actually have control over, and then what and who we are able to influence. And we can actually create plans around that right in the midst of change. And we can teach the discipline of planning like this when we have lulls in the change. I won't say the change stops, but maybe it's at a little lower pace at some points. And so we have clients who now do this for their teams. So they map out. One of our clients, Mark, mapped out what his team could commit to even in the midst of change, because they were able to identify what they could control, even if their external, when I say external, I mean external to their team, even though that environment was shifting. They could still commit. They could identify what they were able to commit to because it was in their control, and they were able to identify who they could influence to maybe even push it to the next level. So that's one idea, is to create actionable plans based on what's in your control and what's in your influence. Another thing we can do is we can create conversations. We can hold conversations and provide a framework for people to distinguish between what their actual job is and what is someone else's job. So this creates clarity on what is in our control, and it can reduce frustration. So some of our clients, well, almost all of our clients are super smart and capable. They really know their stuff, and they have great ideas, and they want to be able to influence in a broad capacity across the organization. They really relish making that kind of a difference. And sometimes when you have people like that who are motivated, who take ownership, they lose track of who gets to make the decision, and that when something is not actually within our role and we don't get to make the decision on it, suffering about someone else making a decision that is different from the one we would have made, it becomes really hard for us. In times of rapid change, we need to really get clarity on what decisions are ours to make and what decisions belong to someone else. And we need to make the conscious choice of not derailing ourselves because someone who has a different set of decision-making responsibilities makes a decision that's different from ours. So that clarity, what decision is ours to make versus what decision is theirs to make, really helps us get settled and understand what's in our domain and what's in someone else's. And that can help calm us. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with it. We can align that it's my part is done. It's at the gate, waiting to be used by the other team who has a choice whether or not to use it. Another thing we can do that's really effective in both home and work scenarios is we can do some scenario planning. We can ask ourselves, what are some of the things that are likely to happen? And then we can make some choices about, if option A happens, what would I do? If option B happens, what would I do? If option C happens, what would I do? And so it's not like we have to build a big formal plan, but if we can get in our minds that there's not just one way to do something, that there are many ways of doing it, and if we don't have the control of the decision, one of the things we can get ready for is the decision that's made. So identify at least 3 or 4 options that could happen, and then prepare yourself and your team to respond to whichever decision is made. That's smart leadership. Another thing is we can show up as supportive to those who do make the decisions, even if we were not invited to make the decision or we weren't part of the advisory group to the decision-making process. It really does take maturity, leadership maturity, and the ability to think strategically at a whole new level to be able to support a decision that's different from the decision you would make. In that case, some of the tools that we've just mentioned previously about identifying what's within your control and what's influence, inferring that if it's not in your control and not in your influence and it's somebody else's decision to make, then our opportunity is to get on board with that decision because it will, even if it isn't the most efficient, even if it's not the most effective, if it will help us toward our goal, if it'll help us in the direction of our goal or our mission, then we can get on board in support of it.
Yeah, no, those are really, really great points. And, choosing what you can control. We often teach in our leadership elevation workshops to choose our battles and to align to outcomes without losing our own integrity and to maintain our authenticity.
Yeah. I think we have the opportunity to be clear about whose job it is to make the decision, to support the decision, to make that decision the best decision it can make. Sometimes the tendency is, if a decision isn't our decision or if it's different from the decision we would make, the human tendency is to withhold our support. Maybe sometimes people even actively fight against the decision. They continue to fight even after it's been made, or they go underground. But honestly, we have a tremendous opportunity to support those who make the decision and to use our efforts to make that decision the best it can possibly be. And then if it doesn't work out and it falls short of the goal, then we are in a position to continue to support the right outcome because we've done everything we can to make the decision that was made positive. And so we've gained trust in the process, right? Trust from the people whose decision it was, instead of showing up as the enemy to the decision. You see that there's a really important difference there. Showing up as supportive even when we don't agree is a relationship building strategy. We can align to the outcome even if we didn't pick the path. The other thing that we want ourselves and others to do is to preserve our physical, mental, and emotional health, because we want to live healthily. We want our employees and other leaders to live healthily, to learn from the current experience, and be able to influence and contribute our genius and their genius day after day. We don't want to draw artificial lines or artificial battlefields that require people to give up their control and influence or actually cause them to flee the environment.
Well, that is such practical and insightful wisdom that you've shared with us about how, leaders, how we can cause the right things to happen by being supportive and do it in an authentic way. And I love how just this whole podcast we've touched into, we talked about strategic effectiveness and the human side of it. That wouldn't necessarily be what people would assume that we would talk about in terms of being effective in a changing environment, is to, acknowledge the human side of all of it. And then to take that to our teams and make it work so that we can work together in a forward-thinking way. So many of our clients who are in tech, SaaS, fintech, these forward-moving industries, the steadiness is really critical. So do you have any last words you want to add to what we've talked about today?
It's been really great to talk about this topic with you today, Stephanie. And what I want to leave leaders with is this. I want you to know that even when you feel alone, you are not alone. You are not alone, even if you feel alone. We are as close as your phone, your keyboard, and we invite you to reach out and to get the help you need to navigate some of these most difficult leadership challenges. Everything we do at Paradox Circle Consulting is really to help good leaders become better and the best leaders become great. Whether you're navigating burnout, part of yourself or the part of others, or organizational complexity, or experiencing breakthrough, or you want to experience great breakthrough in the midst of complexity and organizational change, we will help you lead through it. That's our commitment to you. We will help you lead through your challenges and we'll be in your corner.
That's so well said. And thank you for guiding us through this insightful topic, Linda. We're so grateful you joined us on the podcast today. I think it's something that everyone in leadership can relate to, and it's great to know that you're just a phone call away. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Leadership Transformations podcast. If you are an HR leader committed to building a strong leadership pipeline, or a business leader who knows that your company's growth depends on the growth of your people, we would love to connect with you. And we invite you to appreciate the experiences that have brought you to this moment of your life's journey. We invite you to stay open to the possibilities within you. You were meant for greater things. Until next time. At Peridot Circle, we facilitate the growth and transformation of individuals, leaders, and emerging leaders of fast-growing, tech-savvy organizations. If any of our listeners are interested in learning more about our approach to leadership coaching at Peridot Circle Consulting and how to help transform how you show up at work, book a consult with us online at peridotcircleconsulting.com. We would love to help you and your organization achieve more than ever before.